My name is Catherine Wells. I am 32 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I believed I had finally built a life where my mother could no longer reach me with paperwork. I was sitting at the small desk in my own lakeside home on Lake Sunapee, reviewing a client contract for the consulting firm I had started 3 years earlier when the doorbell rang. It was not the gentle knock of a neighbor. It was the sharp, impatient press of someone who expected the door to open immediately. I opened it to find my mother, Virginia Wells, standing on the porch with my Aunt Janet Shaw beside her. Both women were dressed as though they were heading to a town meeting, not a surprise visit. My mother held a thick manila folder against her chest like a shield. My aunt stood half a step behind her arms, crossed eyes already narrowed in judgment. "You need to sign these today," my mother said without hello or preamble. Her voice was calm in the way that always meant she had rehearsed the conversation in her head. "We have already spoken with the attorney. Everything is prepared. All you have to do is put your name on the last page. I did not invite them inside. I stayed in the doorway, one hand still on the frame. What exactly am I signing?" My mother opened the folder and turned it toward me so I could see the top page. The heading read, "Assignment of Interest in Lake Sunapee Family Trust." The legal language below it was dense, but the effect was simple. I was being asked to transfer my remaining stake in the family property, the one my grandfather had left, equally to his 3 children, directly into a new trust, controlled solely by my brother. My brother Daniel Wells had apparently run into trouble again. This time, it was not the small mistakes of his 20s. This time, it involved a failed real estate venture that had left him owing money to people who did not send polite letters. My mother and my aunt had decided the cleanest solution was to move the family's largest remaining asset out of my name before anyone could touch it. "You have always made things difficult when the family needed unity," my mother continued, still holding the folder out. "Daniel's situation is temporary. Once the properties sell, everyone will be made whole. Signing this protects all of us from outside claims. It is the responsible thing to do." My Aunt Janet finally spoke, her tone sharper. "Your mother has carried this family for years, while you stayed up here in your little cabin playing independent. The least you can do is stop being selfish for 5 minutes and sign the papers." I looked at the two of them, standing on my porch, the morning light glinting off the water behind them, the same water that had been the backdrop of every childhood summer we had spent together. I felt the old familiar tightening in my chest, the one that used to make me reach for a pen, just to make the conversation end. This time I did not move. "I am not signing anything without reading every page," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but steady. "And I am not signing anything that puts my name on a document that hides my brother's debts from his creditors." My mother's mouth tightened. She closed the folder with a snap. "You think you are so much smarter than the rest of us because you have your little business and your quiet life up here. You have no idea what it has taken to keep this family's name clean all these years. If you refuse to help now, you will be the one who destroys everything your grandfather built." She stepped closer, lowering her voice even though there was no one else around to hear. "People in town are already talking. They know Daniel's in trouble. If word gets out that the family trust is fractured because one daughter refused to cooperate, it will not just be Daniel's reputation that suffers. It will be all of ours, including yours." My aunt nodded once, as if the threat had been rehearsed between them. "Sign the papers, Catherine, or the next time someone asks why the Wells family is falling apart, we will make sure they know exactly who chose to stand in the way." They left the folder on the small table beside my door without another word and walked back to the car. I watched them drive away down the narrow road that followed the lake. Only after their taillights disappeared did I pick up the folder and carry it inside. I sat at my desk for a long time without opening it. The water outside my window was calm, The same deep blue it always was in early June. I thought about every other time my mother had arrived with documents, college loans. I had been pressured to co-sign a car title I had been told to put in my name, temporarily a small business loan for my brother that had somehow required my signature as a guarantor. Each time I had signed, because refusing had felt larger than the paper in front of me. This time the paper felt heavier. I called my own attorney, Patrick Murphy, and left a message asking him to review the documents as soon as he could. Then I made tea and sat on the small deck that overlooked the water. My hands were steady, but my mind kept returning to the look on my mother's face when I said no. The mixture of disbelief and something colder, like she had already decided I was no longer part of the family she was trying to protect. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was not Patrick. It was my friend, Christina Long, who ran the small bookstore in the village and had known me since I moved here full time. Her voice was tight. "I was at the post office this morning," she said. "Your mother and your aunt were there talking to the clerk. They were not whispering. They said you were refusing to help the family and that people should know. You had turned your back on them. I thought you should hear it from me before it spreads any further." I thanked her and ended the call. The tea had gone cold in my hands. I opened the folder again and read the first page more carefully. The language was careful, almost gentle in its legal phrasing. It spoke of protecting family assets and ensuring continuity of legacy. It did not mention my brother's debts or the people he owed. It simply asked me to step aside so the remaining property could be managed for the benefit of all parties. I closed the folder once more and placed it on the shelf beside my desk, the one that held the few sentimental things I had kept from my grandfather. Then I sat back down and looked out at the lake. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel the old panic that used to come when my mother presented me with a choice between family and myself. I felt something quieter and sharper instead, the clear recognition that this time the choice was not really about property at all. It was about whether I was willing to keep signing my name on documents that erased my own boundaries. I picked up my phone and texted Christina back. "Thank you for telling me. If you hear anything else, I would rather know." She replied almost immediately. "I will. And Catherine, whatever they are trying to do, you do not have to carry it alone." I set the phone down and watched a small boat move slowly across the water in the distance. The morning was still bright. The folder sat on the shelf like a quiet threat. I did not know yet what I was going to do with it. I only knew that this time I was not going to sign first and understand later. If you have ever sat with a stack of legal papers that someone you loved placed in front of you like a test, you already know how heavy the silence can feel afterward. I stayed in that silence for the rest of the morning, letting the weight of it settle before I decided what came next. The next morning, I drove the short distance into the village to meet Patrick Murphy at his office above the old hardware store. The roads along Lake Sunapee were quiet, but I noticed the way a few people who had known me for years seemed to look away a second too long when I passed. The gossip my mother and my aunt had started at the post office was already moving. Patrick was waiting with the folder open on his desk. He was a careful man who had handled the few legal matters I had needed since moving here full time. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "These papers are not what your mother described on the phone," he said, turning one page toward me. "The trust was amended 3 years ago without your signature appearing on the amendment. Your share was quietly moved into a sub-trust that gives your brother primary control once certain conditions are met. Signing this would complete the transfer and also make you personally liable for any debts attached to the new structure." I read the pages slowly. The language was still careful, but the effect was clear. My mother and my aunt had been working on this for longer than they had admitted. The crisis with my brother was real, but it was larger than a temporary cash shortfall. He had used family property as collateral for a development project that had collapsed, and the creditors were now looking at every asset connected to the Wells name. Patrick tapped one clause. If you sign, you are essentially agreeing that any future claims against your brother can reach you through this trust. If you refuse, they will likely try to isolate you legally and socially until you change your mind. Small towns make that easier than you might expect. I left his office with copies of everything and drove back along the water. The day was bright, but the familiar drive felt different. I stopped at the small market for bread and coffee. The woman behind the counter, someone I had chatted with for years, was polite but brief. She did not ask how I was doing the way she usually did. When I reached my car, I saw two people I recognized from the Lake Association standing near the dock, heads close together. One of them glanced in my direction and then looked away. By the time I reached my own driveway, my phone had already rung twice. Both calls were from my mother. I let them go to voicemail. The third time it rang, I answered. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," my mother said. Her voice was still calm, but the edge underneath it was sharper now. People are asking questions. They want to know why you are refusing to stand with your family when your brother needs help. I told them you have always been independent to a fault. I did not tell them you are willing to let the entire family legacy be picked apart by strangers just to prove a point. I kept my own voice even. I am not refusing to help. I am refusing to sign a document I have not had time to understand. That is not the same thing. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your aunt and I have already spoken with several people who matter in this town. If you continue to drag your feet, we will have no choice but to explain the full situation. Daniel made mistakes, but he is still your brother. Families close ranks. They do not hand outsiders reasons to come after what belongs to all of us." After she hung up, I sat on the deck with the phone in my hand. The water was still. I could see the outline of the larger family property across a small cove, the one that had once felt like neutral ground. Now it felt like the center of a negotiation. I had never agreed to join. My phone buzzed with a text from Christina Long. "Can you talk? Something happened at the bookstore a few minutes ago." I called her back. She answered on the first ring, and her voice was low, as though she was still inside the store with customers nearby. "I was in the back room pulling inventory when I heard voices near the front counter," she said. "It was your mother and your aunt. They were talking to someone I did not recognize at first. Your mother said the papers were almost done and that once you signed, the trust would be protected. Then your aunt said something about how you had always been difficult and that sometimes people needed to learn the hard way what it costs to turn your back on family. She mentioned that if you kept refusing, they might have to let certain people in town know that you were the one blocking the sale that could have saved everything." Christina paused. I could hear the soft sound of the store's old floorboards in the background. "The part that stayed with me," she continued, "was when your mother said they had already changed the trust years ago and that you had never even noticed." She laughed a little when she said it, like it was proof that you were not paying attention, the way a real daughter should. I thanked her and ended the call. The deck felt smaller than it had an hour earlier. I walked back inside and placed the folder from Patrick Murphy on the shelf beside the one my mother had left. Two stacks of paper now sat side by side, each one claiming to represent what was best for the family. I did not call my mother back. I did not drive over to the larger property to confront anyone. Instead, I sat at my desk and began making notes in the quiet, measured way I had learned to do when work required clarity instead of speed. I listed every conversation I could remember where legal documents had been presented to me as simple acts of loyalty. I listed every time I had signed because refusing had felt like the larger betrayal. The list grew longer than I expected. Outside, the light on the water shifted as afternoon moved toward evening. My phone stayed silent. The town gossip was moving, whether I answered or not. My mother and my aunt had chosen their weapon carefully this time. It was not raised voices or sudden demands. It was paperwork and reputation, the two things that were hardest to fight without looking difficult yourself. I closed the notebook and looked at the two folders again. One represented what they wanted me to become. The other represented what I was finally willing to see. For the first time since the folder had appeared on my porch, I felt something settle inside me that was not panic and was not resignation. It was the beginning of a different kind of decision. The next morning, I called Christina and asked if she would meet me at the small cafe on the north end of the lake, away from the main village. She arrived with a small notebook and a calm expression that told me she had already decided what she was willing to share. We sat at a corner table where the sound of the water covered most of the conversation. She opened the notebook and slid it across to me. "I recorded it," she said quietly, "not because I was looking for something to use against anyone. Because after I heard the first part at the post office, I had a feeling they might say more when they thought no one was listening. The store has an old security system in the back room. I turned the audio on when they came in again yesterday. I transcribed the parts that mattered." She had written it out in neat, even handwriting. The transcript captured my mother's voice, and my aunt's clear enough that there was no mistaking who was speaking. They had been talking to a man whose voice I did not recognize, someone they called by a first name only. The conversation moved quickly from the trust papers to older decisions. My mother's voice on the page said they had changed the trust 3 years earlier because I had been too busy with my own life to notice. My aunt had laughed and added that it had been easy once they realized I would sign almost anything if it was framed as helping my brother. The man had asked what would happen if I still refused. My mother had answered that in small towns had long memories, and that once people started asking why one daughter was blocking the sale that could save her brother, the pressure would do the rest. Christina waited while I read. When I looked up, she said, "I sent the audio file to myself and deleted the original from the store system. I am not interested in being part of whatever they are doing, but I also did not want you to be the only one who did not know what was being said when your back was turned." I thanked her. The words felt small for what she had done. She had chosen to record and to give me the transcript, even though she had no obligation to either of us. In a town this size, that choice carried its own cost. I drove home with the notebook on the passenger seat. The water beside the road looked the same as it always had, but the feeling of the place had shifted. I called Patrick Murphy and read him the relevant sections over the phone. He told me to bring everything in the next day and that we could file a simple notice protecting my separate interest in the property while we reviewed the older amendments. He did not tell me what to do about my mother or my aunt. He only said the legal position was clearer than it had been 24 hours earlier. That evening my mother called again. I answered. She did not ask how I was. She said, "I heard you were seen with Christina Long today. People are already wondering why you are spending time with someone who is not family instead of handling family matters. This does not have to become uglier than it already is." I let the silence sit for a moment before I answered. "I have read the papers. I have also learned that the trust was changed 3 years ago without my knowledge. I am not signing anything until I understand every layer that was added without me." My mother's voice tightened. "You are choosing to believe gossip over your own family." "I am choosing to read what is actually written," I said, "and I am choosing not to sign my name on documents that hide my brother's debts behind my share of the property." She was quiet longer this time. When she spoke again, The calm had returned, but it was thinner. If you continue down this path, you will not have a family to come back to. Your father and I have already discussed what that would mean. Some things once decided cannot be undone. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply said, I understand. She ended the call without saying goodbye. The following days moved with a strange, measured quiet. Patrick filed the protective notice. The creditors, who had been circling my brother's failed project, received formal notice that my separate interest in the Lake Sunapee property was not part of any new trust structure. The pressure on me eased in the legal sense, but the social pressure in town increased exactly as my mother had predicted. A few clients of my consulting firm asked careful questions about whether I was still available for work. One longtime neighbor stopped waving when we passed on the road. The bookstore saw fewer people stop to chat when I was inside. My brother never called. My father sent one short message through my mother that said only that he hoped I would reconsider before it was too late. I did not answer it. 2 weeks after the folder first appeared on my porch, my mother and my aunt came to my door again. This time, they did not bring new papers. My mother stood on the step and said the family had decided to move forward without my signature. They had found another way to restructure what remained. She did not explain what that way was. She only said that from now on, decisions about the property and about family matters would be made without me. My aunt added, "You made your choice. We are making ours." I nodded once. There was nothing left to argue. They turned and walked back to the car. I watched them drive away and felt the final severing settle into place. It was not dramatic. It was simply the absence of any further expectation that I would eventually give in. In the weeks that followed, the town talk slowed but did not disappear entirely. Some people chose sides quietly. Others simply stopped including me in invitations that had once been automatic. Christina remained steady. Patrick handled the legal details without drama. My consulting work continued, smaller at first, then steadier as word spread that I was still reliable, even if the family stories around me were not. I did not try to repair what had been broken. I did not send messages asking for explanations or offering compromises. I had spent too many years signing documents and absorbing pressure in the name of keeping peace. This time, the peace I chose was the one that did not require me to disappear inside someone else's version of family loyalty. On clear mornings, I still sat on the deck with coffee and watched the water. The larger property across the cove remained visible, but it no longer felt like something I was responsible for protecting, at the cost of myself. The folder from my mother stayed on the shelf beside Patrick's copies. I did not open either one again. They had served their purpose. They had shown me exactly where the lines were drawn and what I was willing to lose in order to stay on the correct side of them. The loss was real. The old network of automatic belonging was gone. Some relationships in town would probably never return to what they had been. My mother and my aunt had made their decision, and my father had gone along with it. My brother remained at a distance I no longer tried to close. There was no dramatic reconciliation, waiting no last-minute reversal that would restore the version of family I had once accepted without question. What remained was quieter and more durable. I knew where my boundaries were. I knew what I would and would not sign my name to. I knew that choosing myself did not require me to hate anyone, only to stop participating in the slow erasure of my own life. The water outside my window continued to change with the light each day. I continued to live beside it without needing anyone else's permission to do so. Thank you for listening to my story. Would you choose yourself